Hello again, everybody. Now, the government's introduced a new police task force to help protect young women and children from abuse. Let's get the view from Labour. Should we? Standing by for us is the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. Hello, Ms Cooper. Thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure to see you. We've been hearing
Morning,
Suella
Kate.
Braverman, the Home Secretary, your counterpart, over the weekend, blaming senior Labour politicians for failed action on grooming gangs when you guys were in power. What would you say in response?
I think, sadly, we have a Conservative Home Secretary who always looks for other people to blame but herself or but the government that's in power. The measures that the ministers seem to be announcing today on specialist police support and also on reporting of child abuse are ones that Labour was calling for 10 years ago, and the government repeatedly refused to introduce them and refused to act. If they were serious about tackling child sexual abuse and exploitation, where is the strategy on tackling the online grooming and abuse? That is escalating and is accelerating fast. Where is their response to the full report of the independent inquiry into child sexual exploitation and abuse, which looked at exploitation by organised gangs, but also looked at institutional abuse, including in church and religious organisations and in care homes? And where is the action to speed up court cases, which are currently taking years? Over the last 7 years, while the Conservatives have been in power, the number of prosecutions and convictions for child sexual abuse has plummeted. That is a devastating record, and it is the Conservatives' record.
Well, the Home Secretary said that you guys failed to act when you could, when you were in power, because of, in her words, cultural sensitivities and political correctness out of fear of being called racist.
Yeah, but once again, I think this is just Suella Braverman looking for other people to blame. So the Louise Casey report in 2015 identified problems around Rotherham and around cultural sensitivities preventing investigations into child sexual exploitation at that time. And we've always been really clear that ethnicity, racism, or cultural sensitivities can never be an excuse for failing to go after the perpetrators of child sexual exploitation. However, that was 8 years ago, and the government failed to introduce any of the measures that we and others called for 8 years ago to tackle child sexual exploitation, to go after grooming gangs, to take the measures that were needed. So unfortunately, we have a Home Secretary and a Prime Minister who have been doing nothing for year after year after year, and all they've got now is some rhetoric. All they've got now is some measures that we called for years ago, and they're still not addressing the much broader issues around child sexual abuse and exploitation that are serious problems today.
Shadow Home Secretary, though, my viewers this morning will want to know if there is something in this claim, whether you were in power, whether the Conservatives are in power, whether you will be in power again come the next election, whenever that might be, whether we're too politically correct, as the government suggests, to take on these grooming gangs.
So that was something that Louise Casey, in her review, Louise Casey did a previous review to the one that we're normally talking about. She did a review back in 2015 into Rotherham Council and what happened then. And that was exactly what she found. And that is why we called, and many other people called, for much stronger measures at that time, because you cannot ever allow any kind of sensitivities around race or ethnicity to ever prevent action around child sexual exploitation and abuse. So you have to take that action, but equally you also have to look at the child sexual exploitation and abuse wherever it is coming from. And what the NSPCC have said is, look, you can't be narrow about this because you'll just create new blind spots. You have to look at it wherever it is. So that just goes back to my concern. Some of these points were made 8 years ago and the government failed to act. They should have acted then. it's no good to just have partial action now. You need to have action on all kinds of abuse, including, for example, the findings that the inquiry found in the Anglican Church or the Catholic Church or in care homes across the country. They set out serious proposals for reform around child protection and around the response from institutions and around the additional safeguarding that's in place. Where's the government's response to any of those issues? So we have to deal with some of those things that happened in Rotherham. They should have been dealt with 8 years ago. And that's why we called for mandatory reporting and for the stronger specialist policing at that time. But you also have to deal with different forms of abuse, wherever it is, whatever community it's in, whatever the background of the perpetrator, whatever the background of the victim.
We only have a finite amount of time. Thank you for sparing the time this morning. What do you blame for what happened in Dover over the weekend when some kids were in a coach for up to 20 hours, not able to get across the channel?
Oh, it's a total nightmare for those children. You had school trips being cancelled that they will have been looking forward to and then just, cancelled as a result of all of this chaos. Look, clearly there are additional passport checks and things as a result of Brexit. That's obviously factually the case. But our approach has been to say we need to make Brexit work. And that means doing proper planning and having proper systems in place. And it's just incomprehensible that the Home Secretary, the Transport Secretary failed to work with the Port of Dover, with the French authorities to have proper planning in place for coach parties, because that's what it comes down to, is the arrangements for coach parties. They ought to be able to get a grip and work together, but we need some leadership, again, from the Home Secretary, rather than her just blaming everyone else, which sadly is something that the Conservative ministers keep doing.
Okay, final thought. Apparently Stevenage woman is who you are aiming at in your campaign ahead of the next general election. Socially Conservative, previously voted Tory, could hold the key to your victory at the next election. I'm old enough to remember Mondeo Man. I think it's fair to say that you probably are as well. Who do you think will identify as Stevenage woman?
I don't know. I've got lots of friends in Stevenage, actually. And I think we will be pursuing votes right across the country, whether it's in Stevenage or Worcester or working through all the other places that people always focus on, whatever kinds of cars they drive as well. I think we've got the local elections coming up after 13 years. To me, it feels like so many services are broken. That's why Labour's campaigning is a much better alternative.
We're out of time. Always great to see you. Enjoy the break over Easter. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks,